Greetings everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Hopefully you're coming from part 1 of this leg lock for dummies series, where we talked about the different types of ashi garamis and the differing degrees of back exposure and counter leg lock exposure that we offer to our opponent when using these ashi garamis. Now here in part 2, we're going to dive into the second half of the chart, which is offensively minded. And we'll talk about how good each ashi garami is at exposing our opponent's heel and which ashi garamis are best for actually finishing our opponent. And then we'll dive into ways to use these ashi garamis in combination to ultimately get the submission. Now, a conversation about heel exposure and finishing power is basically a conversation about your inside leg versus your outside leg. And I touched on this when I did a video about outside heel hooks, but I'll do it again briefly and leave that video in the description below. When we're in a straight ashi garami, our heel hook is going to be an outside heel hook. And our goal is to first expose the heel so we can wrap it and then work to finish. Now, a very common way to expose the heel is to throw our feet to the inside for inside ashi. The reason why inside ashi is so good at exposing our opponent's heel is because it creates a situation where our outside leg is very strong and allows us to force our opponent's knee inside the line of their foot, which makes it easy for us to expose their heel. So when we're in a straight ashi garami, the heel exposure is typically done by the outside leg. Now, when you compare that to a position like outside ashi, where our outside leg is almost pinned to the ground in this scenario, you can see it's going to be very hard for us to expose our opponent's heel. So this is the reason why inside ashi gets a 3 in heel exposure while the other 2 get 1s. So for heel exposure, we wanted a situation where our opponent's knee was inside the line of their foot. But for finishing our opponent, we want the exact opposite. We want our opponent's knee outside the line of their foot. And the ability to create a situation like this comes from our inside leg. So while inside ashi is great for exposing our opponent's heel, it's an outside leg dominant ashi garami. And when we're going for an outside heel hook, while using an outside dominant ashi garami, we give our opponent the ability to roll with our submission. And I'm not saying that you can't finish people from this inside ashi position, but it does give your opponent the ability to counter. They're able to roll with your submission, and if they're able to free their knee line, they can go into counterattacks. A much stronger way to finish is using a position like outside ashi, where our knees are facing the opposite direction our opponent wants to roll. So when they try to roll with our submission, our ashi garami makes it very difficult, because in positions like outside ashi, our inside leg is very strong, which makes it hard for our opponent to bring their knee inside the line of their foot. So that is why outside ashi scores the highest in finishing power, followed by inside ashi, and then lastly, urimi ashi garami. Now, hopefully I did a good job at explaining that and you guys understand it very well, because in cross ashi garami, everything is the exact opposite. From straight ashi garami, when we're going for an outside heel hook, we wanted to bring our opponent's knee inside the line of their toes to expose their heel. But if we're going for an inside heel hook from cross ashi garami and our opponent is able to bring their knee inside the line of their foot, they're going to hide their heel from us. So in cross ashi garami, it's the exact opposite. We want the knee on the outside of the foot to expose the heel. And as you can probably guess, getting the knee to the outside of the foot is primarily done by using our inside leg. And as you can see from inside senkaku, our inside leg looks a bit weak, especially compared to 50-50, where we have both our feet on the outside of our opponent's hip, giving us the ability to really create a strong inside leg. Which is why a typical defense to 50-50 is to cross your feet, because 50-50 has a very strong inside leg, which gives you the ability to expose your opponent's heel very quickly. Compared to inside senkaku, where we talked about previously that it's not a good idea to cross your feet and will often lead in you getting submitted. So that is why I gave 50-50 a 3 in heel exposure, inside senkaku a 2, and cross ashi garami a 1. And just a little side note on cross ashi garami, sometimes we'll wrap the heel and then work our way up the leg. They call it climbing the leg, and then throw our feet into a finishing position like 50-50 to get the finish. So there is an ability to expose the heel from cross ashi, but I think it's relatively rare. Lachlan Giles does it really well, but I still gave it a 1 for my preferences. So if our inside leg was responsible for creating a situation where our opponent's knee is outside the line of their foot to expose our opponent's heel, we're going to use our outside leg to bring their knee inside the line of their foot to get our finishing power. So like we just talked about from cross ashi, we do have the ability to wrap the heel from there, but typically to finish, we're going to climb the leg and throw our legs into either 50-50 or inside senkaku to get the finish. So cross ashi itself is not a very strong finishing position. I think the finishing strength of inside senkaku is very strong because our outside leg is able to pressure into our opponent's knee, forcing their knee to the inside of their foot. Because the classic 50-50 position is such an inside leg dominant ashi garami, sometimes it does come at the price of compromising our outside leg position. Now, I'm definitely not saying you can't finish people from here, but what I am saying is that it's not going to be as strong of a finish as one where you're able to use your outside leg. The other advantage inside senkaku has in finishing is that it's much harder to hand fight. And as your opponent tries to grab your hands or grab your head, you can usually power through that resistance and get the finish. Whereas in 50-50, even if you have their heel and they grab your head, it's going to be very difficult for you to finish. So that is why I put inside senkaku as a 3 and 50-50 as a 2 in finishing power. So now is where things start to get interesting, where we're able to use these ashi garamis in combinations to ultimately get the finish. So if we start off in a Rimi ashi garami, which is not particularly strong at exposing our opponent's heel, but inside ashi is, so we can switch from a Rimi ashi to inside ashi to expose the heel. But inside ashi isn't the strongest finishing position, outside ashi is. So as our opponent spins to alleviate the pressure, we switch our feet to outside ashi to get the finish. And in this way, we can use the strengths of each ashi garami to ultimately enter into the legs, expose our opponent's heel, and get the finish. Another example is if we fall to outside ashi without heel exposure and we don't feel comfortable because of the back exposure and counter leg lock exposure that we're offering to our opponent, we can pull our opponent's leg across our body. So we go from a straight ashi to a cross ashi 50-50 scenario. But as we're trying to expose our opponent's heel from 50-50, we're struggling because they're doing a good job of keeping their knee inside the line of their toes, which is what they want to do to hide their heel from a cross ashi garami scenario. But having their knee on the inside of their foot is exactly what we want from a straight ashi garami scenario to expose their heel. So maybe we transfer the foot back across to a straight ashi garami and try to expose their heel. And if our opponent knows what they're doing, they're going to bring their knee outside the line of their foot to hide their heel from this straight ashi garami scenario. So basically the defense to one is the opening for the other. And if you know the transitions well, you can use this to your advantage. And sometimes your opponent is nice enough to even do these transitions for you. And if you're ready, you can take advantage of the opportunity. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. Going into this leg lock for dummies series, I was expecting it just to be one video, and then I thought, I'll make it 2. And now what I'm thinking is we'll do 3 videos to keep them all between 8 to 10 minutes long. And in the 3rd video, I will address Patrick's question here where we talk about hierarchies and different leg position preferences. So if you haven't already, consider subscribing so you don't miss the final part of this Leg Locks for Dummies series. If you're interested in joining the Discord, shoot me a message on Instagram and I will send you the link. If you really enjoy the content and want to support the channel, check out the Patreon link in the description below, and we'll see you in the next video.